So Tim, I'm going to hand over to you now. Just wanted to do a very quick introduction. You all know that Tim is Emeritus Professor of Food Policy at City, and he founded the very Centre of Food Policy 30 years ago this year, so in 1994. Just briefly, he's a Fellow of the Faculty of Public Health and was PI and then Senior Advisor to the food research collaboration that linked academia with civil society, which many of you will be familiar with, the publications that came out over the 10 years from 2013 to 2023. Tim was policy lead on the Eat Lancet Commission in 2019 and the report that came out. And his latest book, as many of you will have read, is Feeding Britain. Most recently, however, Tim's been working on a really important report about how to improve civil food resilience and defence. And that's what we're going to hear about tonight. So thank you very much, Tim, for joining us, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Christina. I hope you can all hear me. Never, ever correct your introducer, but Christina said I started the Masters. I didn't. We started it as a team of actually 4 of us, but it certainly was why partly I came back to academia, because I thought there was a real need for it, and here's our Masters going from strength to strength still. But thanks for that kind introduction, and it's actually a great pleasure for me to come to do a Food Thinkers. I've never done a Food Thinkers because it was one of the ideas that we had and I ran in my time, but it's now much better organized and much more consistent. So it's really good. So it's actually a real pleasure to do this. Thank you very much. As Christina said, I'm going to give sort of taster really of some of the thinking that's come out of a process that I've been involved in. And anyone who knows my style, I do quite dense slides, and they'll be made available. The report is not out yet. Indeed, it's just literally being finalized at the moment. So I hope it'll come out. And it's being done for a body called the National Preparedness Commission. You can look it up if you like. It's sort of basically the great and the good, concerned about what's the state of preparedness in Britain for shocks. And it asked me to, what would I do, and what did I think, and should there be a report on food? And I said, yes, I do think, and I'd be happy to do it, but only if I focused on the public. There is an enormous scope, as you can appreciate, it goes into some quite scary, very important stuff, about wars and aggression and things like that. And I can't go into that. I can talk about it, and indeed have at some length, but I'm not going inside the secret state or anything like that. But this interest from the National Preparedness Commission, and other countries have similar, so we shouldn't be surprised, is because, second bullet point, many countries, scientists, civil society, industry, bits of government even, some governments have really begun to recognize the scale of the current, what we call polycrisis, that it's the problems and shocks from food are not just environment, but also health and geopolitics. We're seeing that before our eyes at the moment, social inequalities, big disparities within societies, within culture, and the geopolitics. And the question is right to pose for the British food system. How resilient is it? And how resilient is the public, is what I said to the National Preparedness Commission. I'm interested in the public. I work in public health. It's the health of the public, as Jeff Rayner always used to say to me. So question I started with 16 months ago, I've been thinking about for a couple of years. Does the UK have a government resilience approach? Does it address food? Well, in my Feeding Britain book, I'd said I didn't see much sign of it, but there is some. And it tends to ignore or be vague about food, and it tends to be quite top down, fairly sort of Whitehall-ish, if in central government, for those not from Britain. And not far below the surface, anyone working on this knows that there is basically a fear of consumers. You don't want to tell people about the risks of their food system because you don't want them to get frightened. It's what I call the don't frighten the horses approach. But I think that ignores consumer literacy. It ignores that people read the papers or read the media. But quite rightly, the counter view is, well, that media can actually fan and accelerate and amplify and create totally unnecessary fears and panics. So the big question that I have been asking myself, and indeed many people, is what is civil food resilience and what could strengthen it? What does the term resilience mean? Well, it's been around a very long time, basically 5 centuries. It comes from the Latin word, if you speak Latin, which I was taught Latin, and it sort of essentially means, top left on this slide, bouncing back from shock. You have a shock, and can you bounce? Can you resile? Can you come back? And it's appeared in academic disciplines, various, but physics has been, to some extent, the cutting edge of that, but not if you go back to the 17th century. Engineering, psychology. I first started being aware of it in psychology. I was originally a social psychologist, getting interested in food. And people I used to read and indeed analyze their thinking, looking at the results of children's mentality in adversity and war, childhood development being affected, people like Bowlby and Rutter and so on. But the big thinking of resilience to most people in modern world, they think it's just an ecological term about plant life after fire, after flood, or after devastation. But in public health, it's been very important as well, because of public health having to resolve and help people recover after catastrophes. On the right, top right, you see a classic sort of model of, if you like, the system bounces around in that sort of bed there, and it has a shock and is driven up. And its resilience is about whether it can exist still in that new level of existence. In the bottom figure, from another interesting paper from Kinchin quite recently, saying, well, of course, in engineering, it means that you don't want a building to become something else. You want it to stay up. You want a bridge to stay up if there's a shock. Think of the Italian motorway collapse, for example. But so ecological resistance on the right, and indeed the graphic above, is very different to the notion of engineering resilience. But what do we mean by food resilience, is what, if we can say? Well, I'm old, and I go back to this. A guy called Baran in 1964, so this is 60 years ago, working for the Rand Corporation, was interested in technology, networks, electronic networks, and started raising issues about control and centralization. And this is the graph from his paper back then. And in a sense, it captures a lot that I have been and got interested in, and that people, whether they're insurance companies, and you'll see me talking about insurance shortly, a classic view is a centralized one there. You've got that central node. A decentralized network is one with multiple nodes like that. And a distributed node, distributed system is that on the right, where it's got multiple nodes. Now you imagine, let's just think, let's be apocalyptic. Say you've got a centralized system of electronic telephones, and you've got one central station. You bomb that and the thing collapses. In the middle one, you'd have to have 5 bombs. If you had looked at the right, you'd want 20. So there is a whole thing about distributed resilience as opposed to centralized resilience, comes on how the system is designed. One of the things I've been doing, and I hope my report is really useful for people, whether you're academic or food industry indeed, or government particularly. But my main focus is the public. This paper is a really important one. I've put the reference at the bottom here. It's Tyndall and colleagues 9 years ago. It's a very nice paper, much cited, rightly so. On the left-hand side, he's rightly saying, as we all talk in food policy, of the connections of the dynamics of the food system. You've got shock there at 1 o'clock on that left-hand graph. It gets absorbed, the shock is absorbed, and then you can react. The resilience is beginning to start there, and you restore to something that is like a food system, and you then learn from it. I'm now at 9 o'clock on the clock, and then you, at 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock, you're building resilience and robustness. That's a kind of model of resilience with the stresses, the outside forces coming in on those grey lines. And Tyndall and colleagues summarized to some extent what I wrote a paper for the government when I was a government commissioner on sustainable development commission. I wrote a paper that food security, you cannot talk of food security unless you're making your food system sustainable. The only secure food system is a sustainable food system. And in the sense, this is also from Tyndall, they're saying exactly the same thing. The resilience and sustainability are flip sides of the same coin. So this is very useful. But where are the people in this? Where are the people in this? Now, sometimes food resilience, code up top on the title here, food resilience, is often reduced to land use or self-sufficiency. On the left is a wonderful bit of graphic from Henry Dimbleby's really good National Food Strategy, the plan, his second final report that was not rejected, just ignored and sidelined by the government to their eternal shame as far as many of us are concerned. This is a model of Britain, the UK, if you like, and saying, look, well, if you looked at the whole of Britain, you'd say that great big green bit is the amount of land that's spent on beef and lamb. And the middle center of England there, the light blue color, is dairy. Cereals, the bottom southeast of England, and represented by that. And top left of Scotland, you've got broadleaf woods. And then you've got this whole block over in the sea there, as it were, metaphorically, which is actually using other people's land. So that's, if you like, a land use approach to, and you think, well, look, a food resilience, where's the resilience in that? Some people go to the data on the right. This is the British government's own data on where Britain gets its food from. It only produces 58% of its own food. It exports 9%, so that's kind of a minus. And then it gets the bulk, the biggest by far, of where it gets its food from is the EU. This fluctuates. Now both of these are important, but you can't say this is resilience. A totally autarkic, home-produced, self-sufficient country would not necessarily be resilient. It could still be highly vulnerable to shock. This is some of my favorite and very important thinking by my friend John Ingram and his colleagues Monica Zurek and people at the Environmental Change Institute at Oxford. A lovely series of papers that they've done. They basically have proposed that we can think of resilience as being about 3 R's: robustness, recovery, reorientation. So think back to those models of that little ore bouncing up and getting to a different status. That requires robustness. It requires you to recover. It requires a reorientation to think about what you want to do. But they also then go further and say this requires 3 adaptation approaches to enhance what we mean by the delivery of food system resilience. They're talking about food system resilience. These are all adaptation of activities and drivers and what you want from a food system. This is wise stuff. This is getting very rich. Now, what's my interest? What did I start when I was asked by the National Preparedness Commission? What did I think? And this is really when I want to pay handsome, fulsome thanks to 2 graduates of our centre, Natalie Newman with a doctorate and Anthony So, the master's, who, when I realised I was getting to really complicated stuff, much more, I mean, I knew it was complicated, but I wanted to do a bigger and better job. So I took them on, and really they have been invaluable to me and extremely grateful to them. So, but I take the responsibility for it. My focus is on this, the word civil in red. Why did I want to focus on it? Well, I wanted to look at the social dynamics. I wanted to look, if you believe in supply-demand economics, why are we not talking about demand? Most of the thinking about food resilience is food systems resilience, but actually it's mostly about supply. It assumes that as long as you get supply okay, the demand will be okay. Really? That's not a public health analysis. So thirdly, I wanted to really explore what the US academics and NGOs taught me to call the public interest. This is where the Latin comes in, the word civil, from that Latin word of cives and civitas, a collectivity of citizens. I was wanting to know, and I still want to know, but I'm a bit clearer, how we can consider the role of the people, the public, consumers en masse, and to explore, fourth bullet point, what options they have, or what are thrust on them. What room for maneuver do people have? There's quite a lot, actually, but also not enough of certain sorts. And then, because I'm reasonably well read in this, I knew that I wanted to look at the UK resilience framework. Now, I can't ask you, if you were an audience in a mass scale, I'd now ask how many of you read the UK government's national government resilience framework? I've done, I think, 7 talks in the run up to finalizing my report. And I think I've only known two hands go up in probably 1,000 people of audiences I've addressed. But it's actually very interesting. We'll talk more about it in a moment. But there's relative silence in that resilience framework on social resilience. So I knew that when I was starting. Don't frighten the horses. Don't induce panic. But my question to myself was, is it better to have public engagement early, before shocks, than later, fury, and why weren't we told? Now, here is a study which I think is really one of the best, just come out from, led by a New Zealand academic, but done in the US. And I'm a huge fan of this, by Jane Lloyd. Really wonderful. We've been corresponding with her. Really great. But and this is no disrespect to this study. You can see that essentially it's thinking of resilience and the resilience of the food system attributes as the food supply chain, producers, processors, distributors. And the delivery of security is something from looking after and protecting it from shocks, the, if you like, yellow, goldy color coming in on the side. I like that model, but where are the people in this? And I've been writing to Jane about that. But have a look at this paper, Jane Lloyd and colleagues. It literally came out last week in, I think, sustainability. Is it sustainability? I can't remember. Maybe I'll look it up when we've got Q&As, because everyone should look at that. In fact, I tweeted it. So if you follow me on Twitter or X, it's on that. I put it in a week ago. So what I've been doing in this study, or we've been doing, mapping and identifying the challenges, the known risks. I'm looking at the government resilience framework and what's going on. We've done interviews. I've done 60. We've done very, very intense interviews, only about 2 or 3 very quick, from people very busy. We've gone from very local to national, people inside track, inside government, inside big business, experts, civil society, you know, really done a broad job. You know, I did a lot of interviews in my working life. I've never done as deep as this. We've done a survey of bodies you've probably never heard of called local resilience forums that Anthony helped me on. And indeed follow-ups from that across England and Wales. There are these bodies called resilience forums. We've looked at, well, more than, but have ended up with 10 countries. I've called them vignettes. We went through embassies, we went through government websites, routes, as much as we could to get their official pictures, to try and do a compare and contrast for Britain. And we've gone down. We have not, I assure you, just looked at what the British government thinks and said, oh, well, that must be what happens. We've looked at localities. We've looked cities. We've gone down to the micro local through to the you know, quite serious devolved administrations, Wales, Scotland, and so on. The focus mostly, I should be clear, has ended up as being on England and Wales, mainly because Northern Ireland is very particular in terms of its structures. I'm sure I don't need to explain. Because of in the EU, but not in the EU, all the peculiarities of the Windsor Agreement and so on. But also Scotland is much further ahead than England. It's got its good food nation and so on. But I've tried to give examples from Scotland where possible. Okay, let's talk about risks. I'm not going to go into this in too much, but this is kind of summary of what I've done in the report. You know, I'm sure it wouldn't take most of you on this call long if you wanted to look. There are environmental potential shocks. There are resource shortage potential shocks. There's aggression, war, satellite taking out. There's economic shocks, societal shocks, political shocks, health shocks. Well, I've tried to cover them all in the report, identifying what they are, how serious they are, and all. On the top right, the photo there, a reminder, that's Mariupol, where most of Ukraine's, or a significant proportion of Ukraine's grain exports went out, and that's what happened after Russia bombed it to smithereen. Bottom right, you're seeing social disruption occur there. That's a UN food donation lorry being looted. So desperate are the people inside Gaza that, if you like, some of these themes can cross over, and they can go through different stages. So the economic problems can be poverty, inequality. The societal ones can be, if we all go and stockpile in advance, you get empty shelves, and then people start getting more shocked. It becomes a political criticism, loss of faith, loss of trust, and so on. So these are all very complicated relationships and so on. But in this one slide, I'm summarizing an awful lot of thinking and digging. But the good thing I can tell you is that the government is there before us. There is a system called the National Risk Register, top left, the title. The NRR is the British government's National Risk Register, much admired in resilience studies and risk studies by other countries at that level. And the latest version that came out while I was getting already well going last year, itemizes 89 risks to the UK, serious risks. And this is a graph from that report. It's a public document. And on the right-hand side, you can see numbers under headings, and actually the numbers go on right on. But I obviously didn't want to put them in because it wasted space. The key point I'm making here is almost none of these address, think about food. Food does not feature in this list at all, with one minor exception, the possibility of antimicrobial resistance causing disruptions, and possibly pandemics. But actually all of these could be dissected and said, well, what's the implications of this to the food system? But bottom left, also extreme left of my slide, not the National Risk Register slide, the government rightly says it's a huge exercise they do, started under Labour, still carried on by Conservatives and the coalition government. So this is good. I want to give you good news. There is a formal system of risk assessment going on, but themes cross-cut. And there are 9 themes that the government rightly and the people producing the National Risk Register say, look, terrorism, cyber, state threats, geographic, diplomatic issues, accidents, natural environmental hazards, human health, societal conflicts, etc. They can all cut across. But here in this risk table, diagram, on the left-hand axis, its impact. Further up to the top of the page you get, the more serious it is. And on the bottom, likelihood. The more you go over to the right-hand side, the more it's considered likely. And way in that top right corner, pandemic is deemed to be the most likely. But equal danger and difficulty is chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear attacks. Forgive my shorthand there. But down bottom left, a sunk vessel blocking ports. Well, hey presto, we've had 2 of those recently. Sorry, not ports, but Red Sea, Suez, and attempts by the Houthis to certainly take out 2. Not going to block the Red Sea, but you know what I'm getting at. And sort of in the middle, cyber attack on infrastructure. Well, cyber attack is deemed to be one of the big risks for food. So this is good stuff. But when we go to nothing on food, but when I go to business and go and interview business and talk with people, I know people who do this sort of work, I find This is from Lloyd's, the insurance company, the risk of risks people. And you see, they're very simple model. The risks, supply chain, demand, they're talking about demand, they're interested in the public, operational risks. You can see different sorts of risks grouped in some way. These are getting very close to my list that I started before I gave you National Risk Register. Theft, ransomware, natural disasters, currency fluctuations, energy shortages. There's a great deal of concern about the dangers and difficulties of power outages at the moment. We can look at others. Here is a very big company, Aon, last year, producing a model I think we'd be proud of. Food, agribusiness, and beverage supply chains, they're wrapped around by all of these potential difficulties that would undermine and co-damage it. On the right-hand side, this is starting to get very interesting. Chatham House, an excellent study, actually done by Rob Bailey and Laura Wellesley. Laura's still there. Rob Bailey's moved on. But a fabulous study done about, but not about UK, but about food risks. Using this sort of thinking, the notion of one of the biggest ports in Britain, and talk with people about that and spend a lot of time thinking and talking with the industry of the logistics. They're locked into certain ways. But this excellent Chatham House study, using other people's work, but really putting a fabulous amount of thinking and indeed technology into data management of it, came up with 14 choke points, really serious choke points. Now, if you look at it, surrounding there's Britain at the top, Dover Straits, it's one of the big choke points of the world. Why? Because so much food goes through to Rotterdam and then comes to Britain. The Red Sea, the Suez Canal, the Black Sea ports, the Turkish Straits. Wow, these have all become very hot since this map was done, for reasons I'm sure you know. What about the institutional architecture? I've told you about the National Risk Register. Down there's the bit of the front cover, but not many of you will know the logo at the bottom, the Civil Contingencies Act 2004. I happen to be very interested in that because it was set up at a time when I was very involved in looking at risks and difficulties, and there was a threats of lorry strikes in Britain in 2000, the late 1900s, 2000s, early 2000s, and I talked with ministers at the time, and they were setting up, and I knew later, and indeed worked with one of the people who helped set up this act. And it created a system in England and Wales of local resilience forums. There are 38 forums at the more local level, and there are 4 in Wales. And Scotland has food partnerships, resilience partnerships, and Northern Ireland the same. And there on the right is the front cover of the Government Resilience Framework. I hope you all read it tonight. It's a lot cheaper than drinking alcohol or doing something else to send yourself to sleep. But I jest, it did not send me to sleep, and it shouldn't you either. What I've been want you to know is the UK has actually been developing a really pretty interesting approach to risks and resilience. The Civil Contingencies Act, the framework, the National Risk Register, it's mostly centralist, mostly top down. It kind of gets near the people with local resilience forums, but really at the bottom, the challenge is how to plug the gaps in between policy and reality, central and local, and sectors and public. And that's what I've been trying to do. It's been evolving, is what I'm saying. You can go back to the year I was born, 1948. A civil defense corps was created, worried about nuclear war, which of course Britain had been a co-developer of that threat. But really, the modern system of resilience planning and thinking in Britain certainly really kicks in the 2000s. The Civil Contingency Secretariat was created, taking over from the closure of the Civil Defence Corps and so on. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff, and we've done some mapping of what these structures are, not necessarily going inside them because that's up to the state, but there is a structure that we can say which could and I think should apply more to food. Uh, there is an institutional architecture that we've mapped quite carefully. I'm not going to go into this in detail, but I've done this for this lecture. Of central government, I've told you a bit about that, the local government, local resilience forums, local authorities, mayors, but they really, as we know, there's quite a lot going on at that local level, but it's not connected to the resilience framework thinking. Top right, there are a lot of ministries, the Ministry of Defense, DEFRA, Department of Health and Social Security, International Trade, Department of Energy, and Net Zero. These are key. And you've got agencies, the Food Standards Agency, the whole Office of Health Impact and so on, the Environment Agency. So there's potentially a very big, and is a very big web of state machinery that we could analyze and think about. I'm not going to talk about this, but this is the sort of table we've done, trying to say what's involved across central government, devolved, local, and so on. There's I'm glad to say this came out when I was really well underway. The Cabinet Office National Cyber Security Agency, a relatively new agency, and offshore from our basically national protection system, came up with, I thought, a really nice, really neat, simple 5-step approach to trying to understand risks. Step 4, this is from the Critical National Infrastructure Knowledge Base. Food is one of the 13 critical national infrastructures, according to the British state. I agree with that. I can't believe you don't if you're interested in food. It's very important. But how can we assess it? There's supposed to be an annual review. The last one I can find was in 2018. And it's not public. Why should it be? Or am I unable to find it? No one I know can find it. It requires us to think, and Lindy Sharp, who ran the food research collaboration, kindly sent this to me and another person. You know, if we're interested in resilience at the local level, who are we talking about? You could say, oh, well, we need farmers in there. Really? This is a fabulous paper by Cam and Potter, just out, saying, well, actually, if you're interested in land use and what's going on with land, there is a different typology of landholders now needed. This is absolutely right. There are farmers' estates in the middle of this, big estates. Britain's a land of big estates, but there are also a new category of land managers. And they end up in this paper with different, down the bottom, 8 different categories of people who, if one was bothered about land use for a resilience framework, and that wasn't what Cam and Potter were interested in, but I'm interested in that. You need to be bottom left. You've got to take the wildlife trust seriously. These are huge landowners now, the National Trust. There are huge investors going for natural capital, planting trees. There are lifestyle owners of things and so on. And this is just neat thinking, ripe for applying to resilience thinking, but that's about supply. What about the public? On the left, you see us. There we are, mass public. On the right is the nightmare. Don't frighten the horses. Toilet paper went, okay, when COVID struck. Is that rational or is it irrational? I've met people who think, well, it's irrational. Not many now. I thought it was totally irrational at the time. But how do you prevent that if you want to stop disturbances accelerating and amplifying? One of the things I've done is produce, I think, a new vulnerability typology. On the left, I'm not going to spell this out, intensity. How vulnerable are we? What intensity? Is it going to be acute? I've applied the public health, medical sort of language of acute and chronic. Food is an area where you get chronic problems. We accept them. Obesity, poverty, premature death, ill health, poor quality, people who can hardly walk, is accepted. And then acute, bang, suddenly, shock to the system, a power outage. So intensity becomes very important. I'm not going to go through all of these, but we can, and I have tried to analyze vulnerability, i.e. the possibility of risks, by intensity, scale, duration, exposure, sensitivity, capacity, impact, social determinants, I'm a mate of some of the architects of that social determinant thinking. It has to, and it applies here. And the key thing, expectation and preparedness. Our interviews shown that time and time again. How much should we inform the public or include them in that? Well, that's a delicate issue. What responses and possibilities consumers have? One of the things I've tried to apply is individual or collective. What response? Well, the obvious one is stockpile. But is there a collective stockpile? People don't have room. They can't afford to stockpile. You know, there's food poverty in this rich economy. People are cutting back on food to eat, let alone to stockpile. So do we just say only the rich can stockpile? Houses don't have pantries. Why can they do it? So what notion of collective stockpiling could there be? I'm not going to say what I'm coming up with, but I think we've got to think about that. What household protection? Some of the studies we've done of other countries, they're giving advice to people, to citizens. Sometimes their citizens don't know it, but some countries are giving really clear advice and letting their people know. The closer they are to to the Russian border, the more they're giving this advice. But how long? For 3 days food, 7 days food, 3 months food? You know, some religions say, expecting Armageddon and God coming and lifting the worthy, say store for 3 months. On what basis? What do we do that? Is it about going off and growing your own? Tell that to someone in a tower block. Well, actually, funnily enough, in some areas in Dunkirk, I've been pointed to a really interesting project where tower blocks have actually dug up all of the concrete around them, and I've got raised beds and are growing their food. Community actions, what do we mean? Community gardens, community cafes, community response, community networks. The famous example is Liège in Belgium. It's come up with the concept of food belts, literally surrounding itself with food growing. That's music to the urban and peri-urban agriculture sort of world. How does that translate if you're in London? I'm talking to you from the center of London. Where's the chance of that? Rationing? Well, rationing is one of the things that makes public resilience more equitable. Everyone gets fed according to their nutritional needs. That's the basis of nutrient-based rationing, equitable rationing. You can have rationing, markets ration, in the sense that the rich eat more and better and live longer through dietary health than do people and poor. What's the version and equivalent for food of warning systems? Air raid file. I have my grandfather's, great-grandfather's, forgive me, First World War air raid warden's bell. What's the equivalent of that in food? How many people do we need to ignore to add to the zillions of people warning about the dangers of food inequalities? One of the first rounds of interviews I did for this study over a year ago, people said they thought the vulnerability number one was food inequalities in Britain. So these are very big issues that we can clarify. My report's going to try and do that. I'm not going to read this at great length, but just to give some tasters, there is the interviews clearly showing, you know, people agree there is a polycrisis and there's a poor conceptual framework for food resilience. Resilience is often seen as a return to normality, whereas in fact, most insiders think that's unlikely if there's really big shock. There's a lot of innovation going on in Britain, sustainable food places, food partnerships, wonderful community activities. I've done my best to try to identify, and in Natalie and I particularly have tried to give due justice to the wealth and brilliance of the movements. And this happens in other countries too. The central government, however, is very Whitehall focused and gets vague when it's about the local. And there's little or no planning with or for the public. The public's not being engaged in this. But the good news is the people inside the machine of resilience are acutely aware of this. That I found very encouraging. They said, we think food is coming on the agenda. even though their job might be blue light brigades. You know, what happens if one bomb goes off and or terrorist strikes? You know, the people who deal with that. I've got family members who do that work, but I didn't interview them, I assure you. But there's awareness generally that things can't go on, that Britain is really not in a prepared state. But I'm doing this work for the National Preparedness Commission. SMEs, small businesses, you know, I've been doing this 50 years. People used to say, oh, well, small countries, companies, they'll be able to do, they'll sort out. No, they can't. They're struggling. They're hand to mouth. They're short of capital. They've not got the infrastructure and so on. They could be scaled up, but that would have to be part of a very different approach to resilience. And what food defense thinking there is mostly at the company level. The British Standards Institute gives detailed advice for corporate company protection and defense on food, but there's none for the public. That, if you like, gets me out of bed. So one of the key themes of my report will be that the just-in-time system of food, I think, has got to become a just-in-case. The vignettes, I'm not going to go through this. It's been extremely rich looking at other countries. You know, countries like Sweden, Latvia have total concept of total defense. Switzerland has government stockpiling. You know, Britain, meanwhile, says, oh, well, we'll all get fed by Tesco. It'll be okay. Well, I want you to know some of the big companies are not so confident they can deal ahead with really big crises, whether that's climate change or others. And there's, I think, a really welcome recognition in really across the piece that we've got to address the issue of citizens. My proposals are going to be, we've got to begin the process of transition from just in time to what I've called just in case. I think we've got to begin the public engagement. I want to propose setting up food resilience committees. I've had a long discussion with people about would this, you know, take over sustainable food places or local food partnerships. On the contrary, I can't see the point of that. The vibrancy, the democratic goodwill, the experimentation that's going on is deeply moving and fabulous. But, you know, we need structures. Mayors would like to do things. Directors of public health would like to do things. We need to get them together with the civil society movements, allowing autonomy in people, but we've got to have a structure, I think, like we in World War II and before World War II started to prepare structures. I'm proposing food resilience committees could really help better engagement at that civitas, public, civil level of engagement. And I think looking back up at the national bodies, I think food resilience has got to be taken more seriously in the national framework. And I'm going to propose a rethink of what we mean by resilience, and I'll end my talk with this. I think we're more attention on food as one of the 13 critical national infrastructures. I'm hoping it's going on inside the machine, and I'm not privy to it. But I think we've got to have much better long-term planning. We mustn't make this subject to the stupidities of electoral cycles and different politics. This is about the national interest. I want a National Council of Food Security and Resilience. So this is a balance between, as some of the military people I've interviewed, one of them said memorably to me, look, you know, if you want things done very fast in a crisis, get the military people to do it, because that's what they're trained to do. Bang, bang, bang. You people, he was very nice to me, you people, you like to sit and talk and get around in a group and discuss it. You know, that's right. But we've got to balance that democracy and control, I think. What difference does this thinking make? I'm finishing, Christina. I hope I'm on time. How am I doing?
So good, Tim.
I'm a good, yeah, 3 minutes. I've timing myself. God in heaven, am I going to work? Oh, Christina, what difference does this make? Well, I think this thinking starts putting more flesh on the bones of what we mean by resilience. I honestly think that. I think it starts making the institutional architecture something that food can inject into. And I think it's a really big way of thinking about who gets involved. And I repeat that theme I just said. it can help us balance democracy and control. And just to go back, you know, if you're old like me, I was born after the war, Second World War, that photo on the right is an old Anderson shelter. John Anderson, the Home Secretary in the 1938-39, gave his name to this, pushed for by radical scientists of the time in the late 30s. Haldane wrote a famous book saying we're all doomed, and said, you know, we've got to be bombing will kill everyone. Well, of course it didn't. It killed lots of people. But the answer was Anderson's shelter, which is basically a load of corrugated tin, like Christina, you have in Australia on your roofs, bend it over and cover it with earth, and you've got a bit more protection. Okay, that's not bad, but is that civil food resilience? If a bomb drops on that, you're obliterated. So, I mean, we can do things. You can grow a little bit in your garden. I've got a garden, you know, half of my garden and in the sun grows vegetables and fruit. Does it feed me and my wife? No. Is it nice? Yeah. Is it resilient? Yeah, it's a contribution to it in a little way. It certainly makes me think. Now look at this typescript of a plan for Borough X. Of preparing civil defense. This is from 1936, if I remember rightly. This is the local government analyzing and saying, this is how we've got to have civil defense, is the phrase they used, and I like it. I use food defense, anyone who knows my work. This is top down, but at the local level. I'm interested in the missing bits, which is people engaging with that. That's what my report is largely about. But we've got a rich tradition to draw on and think about. I'm not going to go into this. Anthony and I have done things like this. This is mapping Wales. Wales is very interesting because the First Minister is personally in charge of all 4 resilience forums. Only indirectly is the Prime Minister of England and the UK really in touch with resilience forums. So we've thought about that and thought about Wales as a case study, and have done quite a lot of little bits in Wales. And there are my proposed local food resilience committees at the bottom in orange. I don't know what color they're coming on to you, saying how they can connect to the 22 food partnerships that Wales has got across north, south, east, connecting with the blue light services, the responders, police, ambulance, fire, etc., who happen and are there, great people, if something diabolical goes off now locally. So I'm trying to inject food thinking into existing structures. Not we've got time to go into this. This is UK-wide. We can do that at the same level in the UK. But this is where I want to end, with one slide more, Christina, if I may. The key thing, I'm a public health man. Christina is a nutritionist. We share a bond, all of us, I hope, on this call, thinking about what's the point of resilience? Well, it's to feed all the people well. And I'm saying resilience isn't something mid sort of 8 o'clock that you just, well, that's it. You apply that to feeding people. No, it doesn't. You've got to assess 11 o'clock, the risks, to aim, what do you want? John Ingram and colleagues are right. What is your version of food security? To do that, you've got to make your food system more sustainable. You've got to include people in that, the democracy. You've got to have that defense and so on. And around it in blue, I hope on your slide, is all the stuff that my report goes into. What is the possibilities for 4 o'clock? Out of 4 o'clock, just bottom right of the slide, what are the possibilities? What form could civil food engagement take? What form and food skills, bottom left corner, do we need? What, taking top left, what does the government's, I think, wonderful principle, one of the 3 principles, Christina, of the government security, the government resilience framework, that report I put right up at the beginning with the picture of the Thames Barrier on it. One of its principles is a whole of society approach. Another of its principles is prevent and protect. The moment I read those, I thought, we are in business here. We can apply food resilience thinking and get it in. So that's what my report is trying to do. So to conclude, I think civil food resilience is a term I've invented. I think it's really, really good. I say that unashamedly. I think it's getting at something. I think it's a mistake to think that resilience of food systems is just supply. It's not. We've got to think about the people, stupid. I say to myself, echoing Clinton, it's the economy, stupid. It's the people, stupid. I say to myself every morning as I sit and work for another 10 hours on this report. I think we've got to think about just-in-time logistics. How can we help it become a just-in-case? Could they stockpile? They don't stockpile at all. The stockpile is in their wagon, on their ship, occasionally in the plane. The UK resilience framework is really interesting, but too vague when it goes beyond Whitehall. Other countries give us lots of suggestions. I think there's a rich terrain here. I'm encouraging people. I'm old, some of you are young. Get into this. What do we mean by resilience? It's got to be about the people. What do they think? They're sentient beings. I've called it in one section, mass psychology of food resilience. We need lots of civil thinking about it. And the public has, I think, got to be engaged in that. The good news is there's lots going on and bubbling up that really is beginning to engage and offer opportunities for this. But we can't just say, well, they could scale up tomorrow. They couldn't. They're in difficulties. They're short of funds. But there are lots of pointers and pilots and kites being flown. But I think in the end, at the bottom, we do need these local food resilience committees. They would help. Christina, over to you. I think I've got one more slide. I don't know about you, but I have a love affair with Tom Lehrer. When I was a teenager, one of his famous songs is called Be Prepared. Just try and listen to it. It's fabulous. He was a mathematician at Harvard, but he didn't finish his PhD. We shouldn't say that. But he's very witty and very cynical and very wonderful. But I love this first stanza, be prepared. That's the Boy Scouts marching song, be prepared as through life you march along. Be prepared to hold your liquor pretty well. Don't write naughty words on the walls if you can't spell. It made me laugh 60 years ago and it still makes me laugh now.
Wonderful.
Christina.
Thank you very much, Tim. What a passionate and insightful food thinkers we've had this month, talking about a really important cutting edge food systems problem and a new term for us all to be contemplating, civil resilience. We've got lots and lots of questions streaming in. I'm going to read them out and see how many we can get through in the time that we have left. Just to say,
I'm
Renato,
going to be short. Anyone who knows me, Christina, you do enough now. My short answers are about 4 hours long. So stop me after 30 seconds.
We will. I'm going to start with Renato Malaf from Brazil, who says he just wants to link and say hello and
Renato,
reconnect
hello.
with you.
I know Renato.
And with my fellow colleagues at the Centre for Food Policy. So thank you, Renato. Janie Armstrong, my apologies, has quite a conceptual question for you. So can you speak a little bit about how resilience and notions thereof intersect with capability theory? So what I mean is resilience contributes to an entity, large or small, being able to absorb, adapt, or transform. Does this have any resonance with UK policy picture?
It does. Yanni, I presume it's Yanni, who did his PhD with us. Absolutely right, who works at FAO. Absolutely. It's exactly that sort of thinking that's there. And that's partly, Yanni, why I put in John Ingram's thinking, you notice, and Monica Zurich and all that gang at Oxford. I think this is exactly it. I don't think civil food resilience is something totally new. Please don't think I've been arguing that. I've been saying, look, the bits are there, but it's about joining it up, building in a lot of the things you do, Yanni, and people working in developing countries do, is about that. Not that you're in a developing country now, but that's your area. So the short answer is yes.
Excellent. I was expecting a longer answer than that, so that's great. Andrea Zick, where are the reasons why food, sorry, it's just moving around as the as the questions get shifted. So what are the reasons why food is not as present in the resilience frameworks? Do you think it's potentially linked to the resilience of consequentive governments to legislate citizens' food consumption choice?
Okay, I think I know what you're getting at there. Let me be frank. I think you're right, if I'm reading you right. There is a reluctance to engage with the public. I was at a very delicate meeting of almost entirely food industry, very small, the other day, all on Chatham House, under Chatham House rule. And it's clear when it gets to the public, the food industry is reluctant. It's got a view of what citizens and consumers are. It's one big mouth that buys their product. I'm parroting. What I'm trying to argue, and I think the notion of civil food resilience allows us to explore, is the realities of the complexities of people and people in groups. Not just people in crowds, but people in families, in households, in social categories, in age groups, in ethnicities, in cultures. And it allows us to have a much more nuanced approach to what people do and the meaning of food to them. So I am actually thinking in that way, Andrea, I hope.
Great, thanks. Tim, on that, I have a question. How best then do you think we do engage citizens if there's a real reluctance? Do you know, how do we do that strategically and cleverly in a way that isn't fearful and is
Well,
politically,
yeah, possible. Well, there's been lots of experimentation, and Britain's been very good on it, actually. Of citizens' juries, you know, I was a witness to the Climate Assembly, 5 select committees of the House of Commons in England, well, UK, and the Climate Change Committee combined and held and ran a very long process, got taken over by COVID, of having 100, I think it was 104 citizens, representative, age, ethnicity, wealth, etc., and said, you know, what do you think about climate change and net zero? And they came up with answers. The point is that the government ignored it. So you can have these mechanisms and these processes, but ultimately it's pressure from below that makes change. Events change things. I certainly, Christina, I know in the last 5 years since I've been working on this sort of agenda, 6, 7 years, the willingness of even very big companies to recognize that the system is more fragile than they thought has increased. How to engage with the public, to be honest, they don't know. They engage with the public as consumers buying a product. We've got to actually, that's why I've gone down and looked and talked with, I interviewed a very big city region, and I've been looking at and doing mini studies of different regions. As anyone who knows me, I'm very interested in the English mayors. They were all given different powers. The British state is terribly centralized, has a tradition akin to the Chinese and the former Soviet Union. You're seeing it again in Putin's Russia, of being very authoritarian. Britain's a veneer of non-authoritarianism, obviously, and democracy, genuine democracy. But it loves dividing and ruling. Wales was given different powers to Scotland, to Northern Ireland, to London. I mean, London's bigger than all of them. London actually has got some food engagement. It's very good. Birmingham, Manchester, the Yorkshire consortium around Fix Our Food is really interesting. Groups in Wales doing this, the Monmouth, Powys, Carmarthen coalition that's emerged. It's wonderful, really good stuff. So there's engagement. I see, this is becoming a long answer, Christine. I'll try and shorten it. I think we can engage people as individuals, you as a mother, me as a householder or whatever. But we're only going to be able to do it properly if we do it at the bigger scale. And that does require something which you saw a glimmer of it in COVID, where neighborhoods came together and looked after each other, but they were very divided by the wealthy neighborhoods being able to do more than poorer ones, but not lacking. Don't underestimate what poor organizations emerge and how they emerge. And I find myself going back, and people I've interviewed have said, we need a new generation of cooperatives. We need a new civicness to build on. One of the people I interviewed said, my neighbor says, I'm going to stockpile. And I said to him, how? What if your stockpile is destroyed? It's the community, stupid.
Mm.
And he was
Just
right.
on this citizen engagement question, Caroline Seaman said, are you linking directly with the Food Farming Commission and their current work on the food conversation?
Well, I'm an advisor to that, Caroline. So yes, they're waiting for me to do some stuff with them, but unfortunately, I'm writing a report 10 hours a day. But that's precisely what I'm talking about. I'm a great fan and supporter of the conversation that, and it's called The Conversation, that the Countryside Food Farming and Countryside Commission has been doing. I think Britain is great at that sort of civil initiative. And I repeat something I said in my talk, Christina, that I am acutely aware. I don't want to say, right, all of that's got to go. We're now going to have food resilience committees and they're going to be imposed on you. It would be absurd. We just want to make sure that, well, I won't say, I've got relatives living in very poor areas of the north of England, very poor indeed. They haven't got great big X, Y, and Zs going on, and no universities. These are disenfranchised areas. So we've got to have a system that can encourage things to happen. I think Wales has been doing a great job in that with its food partnerships, 22 across that tiny country. There are food partnerships in Scotland. I've been engaging with some people in the northeast of England in a rundown town doing, but great, very nice, doing great work there, part of a county food partnership. I think these are the democracy processes emerging, Christina. So I'm very hopeful. I'm not negative. I'm saying all of those need to be given places in a structure, which at the moment is very top down.
Brilliant, thank you. So Carol McKenna says, please can you further explain what is different by a just-in-case approach versus a just-in-time approach?
Is your name Karen? Was it Karen?
Carol McKenna.
Carol, sorry. Yeah, okay, Carol McKenna, sorry. Hopeless. I tried to write down people's names so that I can try and remember it. Just in case. Okay, that's you spotted that one. Well, I don't want to say too much, but I do in my report. Just in case is, look, for 50 years and in an accelerated way in the last 40 and an astonishing speed in the last 25, the logistics industry has basically got rid of storage. It's brilliant. I spent days with the logistic industry. I've done, serious interviews with people, early morning breakfast meetings and things. I was impressed before, but I'm even more impressed now. And they talked in terms of just in case. Not me, they talked in terms of just in case. They know how near the knuckle things can get. And their industry, say in Britain, I didn't know this, but their industry is, no, I'm not going to say that, it's in my report. Their industry is very well placed to start thinking. I wouldn't impose a new just-in-case system. I'd be talking with them. I wouldn't let them determine it. I would let them, and I've said this to them. I said it in a speech I addressed a big conference of them as part of this engagement. I said, look, I think you need to be part of this. You've been encouraged to go down this route. It was all seen as efficiency, globalization. This was super slick, retailer-led, let Tesco rule type thinking, and it's brilliant. But actually, your industry is dominated by small firms of 4 to 5 lorries. Did you know that? And it's old. Why would people came and spoke to me and said, why would anyone want to be a long distance lorry driver? you now sit for 2 days possibly at Dover or Calais or Folkestone. You're covered with paperwork. You never did see your family. You're not going to see them for longer. There are poor facilities. You know, just in case is not said lightly, Carol.
So just in case means greater infrastructure. Is that what you're...
It does. Do you want to give the talk? That was quicker.
No, I was just... So we have an anonymous attendee saying, can the UK adapt its approach to trade policy to promote greater resilience in the food system?
Well, I think the answer is it should. So my answer to your can question is yes. It should. The key question is it? No. Basically, the trade deals we're doing post-Brexit are kind of catch-ups, you know, trumpeted by Liz Truss or Kemi Badenoch or whoever's in for 6 months, as saying, look at this great thing, you know, we're about to do a deal with India. Well, we don't get much food from India. You get more than you think, actually, but it's not sort of major. You get a lot of rice. And indeed, at one point, I talked to the rice importers. The trade issues have been only thinking about some illusion of how much better will life be after Europe. The realities of that, goodness knows what will happen in the next election, but the realities of that are quietly dawning on almost everyone. In private meetings, you know, one I was in 2 days ago, you know, there was a sense of absolute, what's the word that I can carry it, you know, not a mixture of resignation and sort of resigned fury at the idiocies they're having to do with unnecessary trade barriers. But that's the world we're in now, Britain. They've tried to float us off and say, okay, well, so are we going to get onions from Florida? Just look at climate change, by the way, in Florida. Are we going to forget water security and carry on say, okay, we'll get food from West Africa, not from Europe? Really? Africa's population is reckoned to double in the next 50 years, 40 years. You know, come on, this is a food imperialism. So there are big questions behind your question, Mr. or Ms. Anon. But it's a very good question. It's a very good question.
Area for further research. So Linda Hull has quite a direct question. What legislation needs to be passed? Nothing will happen without legislation. I've just started working in waste and legislation makes things happen.
I agree, spot on, Linda. Anyone who knows me, at the end of my Feeding Britain book, I said we need a Food Security and Sustainability Act. In this report, I'm going to argue exactly the same thing. Let's call it the Food Security and Resilience Act. I think it's absolutely essential to have legislation that gives powers to local authorities. You know, when I go and talk to mayors, they say, look, please don't dump more jobs on us, Tim. We've got no resources. We're cutting back. Our budgets are cut. I've covered all of this in the report, by the way, just showing the collapse of local authority funding. And that's true. I sit on the London Food Board. The one body I'm on is the London Food Board, which is for the Mayor of London. He could close it tomorrow. It's got no legislative position at all. But wow, was it useful and interesting in COVID? It was really important, that intelligence gathering and knowledge that the London Food Board's local boroughs group had and could feed in and build upon. And the resilience team now in the mayor's the mayor's office and the Greater London Assembly, Greater London Authority, it has fed in that food, all that patient work that London Food Board did under the previous chair, Rosie Boycott, and now you know, basically a new generation of people. We've basically put food under about 5 of the deputy mayors, and that's paid off. And that's what you get if you have a resilience committee, a food resilience committee. You've got ways of connection with your director of public health, with your chief environmental health officer, with the trading standards officer, with the head of police, with the social services. We don't build those relationships. That's what food partnerships are doing. But I think they should be in legislation, Linda. I'm completely in agreement. And I'm not going to give what I think that legislation is by date, but I think it is an urgent task to really clarify what powers we want someone to have.
Thanks, Tim. So Ellie Michael says, in terms of food skills for public resilience, can you tell us what other countries have been communicating with their citizens and how they've been able to communicate these messages?
I can, but I'm not going to give you some of the really amazing stuff we've got. So I'm not, quite deliberately. This is before my report is out. But I'll give you tasters. We did, Natalie and I, though I say it ourselves, and I really grovel my thanks again to Natalie. I don't know if she's on, she's not feeling very well. We went through official channels and some very interesting things happened. I'll say one that happened to me. A country, will be nameless, literally it turned out the person who'd been doing their resilience planning was in the country and said meet. So I went and met and spent good time, and then correspondence and much more discussion afterwards. What that country had been doing was, the moment Russia invaded Crimea 2014, it started planning, and it started doing it down to the local level. I'll give you another example. A very large country where I have relatives has a website, in fact, two, which give detailed advice to their citizens of what they should stock, how much they should stock, the processes every household should go for, that every household should have a plan, every household should review that plan, should agree the division of labor within it, should stockpile 1 gallon, I think it is, this is from memory, of good water per person per day for up to 7 days. When I've met people, including my relatives, from that country, and one of my relatives works in fact, technical resilience, I'd never heard of it. I've met one person who did. The other day, last week, 2 weeks ago, I met two very senior people from that government of that country. And when they said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm doing this, and gave a shorthand version of what I'm doing. And the person I knew said, oh, really interesting, Tim, great, we'll look forward to that. And I said, well, actually, I've been looking at your country, and I did a little sketch. I said, oh, really? We didn't know that. And then the other person said, well, actually, I've just been working in another country, country X, I won't say which it was, but a very big and sensitive country, very, very big and sensitive country. And I was given exactly that sort of advice. And I said, that's because you were given the advice in someone else's country to apply it, just in case the proverbial hit the fan there, but you didn't know that it was actually for your country when you live back in your home country. So we've learned a lot of things. Ellie, was it Ellie? Lots of really rich things, but I don't want to overact that. We've only done, I've worked on this full time, all hours that God sends, except I have actually done some other things over the last 16 months. And Natalie and Anthony have worked very hard, but not, they wouldn't mind me saying this, not full time in the same sort of way. So we're a small team. Let me make that clear. So I'm not wanting to say we have found absolutely everything that is ever to be known about country X or country Y, Ellie. But wow, have we found some interesting things for Britain. Other countries provide their citizens with advice. Britain does nothing. I think we should.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tim. Lots of people saying excellent presentation. Thank you very much. Wish I could stay longer, but I can't, including Kristen Bash, Helen Phillips, Harriet Friedman. But I have a question here from Caroline Grutens, who says, Caroline Grutens, it's a big change to create at grassroots level. Many local projects are grant funded, so they don't have longevity built in. Could you see a way to get government to take these initiatives more seriously and provide funding appropriately and accordingly?
Christina, I didn't get that. Uh, hang
So
on.
let me say that again.
Yeah,
It's
no.
been it's a big change to create at the grassroots level. Many local projects are grant funded, so they don't have longevity built in. Can you see a way to get the government to take these initiatives more seriously and provide the necessary funding?
I think you broke up again then, I'm afraid, for me. I don't know if it's you or me. Forgive me. Let me just come out of the chat. I was trying to see what it was. I can't find it, so I went look. I've just lost my thread completely. Say it again, shorthand it, Christina.
So it's about it's a lot to do at grassroots level, and most local projects are grant funded, which are short term. How do we actually get the impetus and the long term funding?
Yeah, is it Caroline? Absolutely right. Look, you don't know me, Caroline. I don't think I know you. You're probably going to say you're one of our students, in which case I grovel my apologies. Um, I'm a total critic of what I've long called projectitis. Great things come, they go. You know, we were lucky in the food research collaboration. We got nearly 10 years. That was fantastic. But we couldn't then, it couldn't, well, I wasn't in charge of it, but we couldn't continue it unless it has some pump running. That ought to be happening all the time. That ought to be a long-term part of the civil society infrastructure of Britain, disseminating information to citizens groups. We need to have something that does that. So you're absolutely right. Britain has done a brilliant job at keeping its civil society weak, if you looked at it cynically. I'm not a cynic because I'm an optimist. I always think people will bounce forward. They do. I'm a psychologist originally by training, but I always think it's quite remarkable how people in groups together can work differently, make things better. But one of the reasons I put in my last slide, Tom Lehrer, if you can't read and you can't read the writing on the wall, you're not going to get anywhere. As Tom Lehrer said, if you can't spell. I think that is one of the truths of life. So you're right. We need to build and consolidate what projects have done. Let me just give you an example. I'm very interested. I'm president of a gardening organization. When I stopped being a farmer, I became, in a fruit and veg interested gardener. I'm not great, but I'm not bad. I'm interested in gardening. I'm interested in supporting gardening. I've been very touched looking at community gardens and looking at allotments and looking at the organizations that service those and represent them. They're fantastic. People come and go on allotments. One of the key moments of my life was working for the WHO in the not just below the Arctic Circle in post-Soviet Union Russia. I said I'd like to go and see a collective farm. We were in the middle of a forest, so I was driven with the WHO person and another Danish key person in their food system. And we were driven for 50 kilometers and arrived at this, clearings and saw the farm. The Dutch were already there, getting them to have black and white cows. But what interested me and struck me was how every house had the most meticulous garden I've ever seen in my life. It was necessity. And it's kind of remained how you see in the developing world. You see just sensational growing of crops and things at the small scale. So how do we get continuity is what you're asking. My point is this. When I've looked at some community gardens, some tend to last longer than an individual sort of project. And I've looked and talked and done a case study of one in Northeast Wales, which has got 3 sites, got about 150, 120 people on it. People pay £25 a year and then get the produce. And it's got 3 gardens, one of 3.5 acres, one of half an acre, and one of about half an acre. And very intensively and beautifully run. They're amazing. absolutely amazing. And that's a small team of people who stuck together, started off by a woman on her own, but then got a gang around her and has just built it up. And it's been going 14 years. That continuity is what we have to aim for, Carol.
Okay, thank you, Tim. We've got a couple more. Depending on the length of the answers, we'll see how many more we can go. Maximum 3, I think. So Polly Anderson has quite a conceptual question. I think
Hello, Molly. I don't know if you know Molly Anderson. She's one of the heroines and stars of this world.
So
How lovely. Molly, I'm honored you joined us.
Molly's question is, I think of food resilience as a negative rather than positive characteristic. The food system needs to be transformed, so we don't want it returning to normal after a shock. Naomi Klein's shock doctrine idea plays out over and over in the food system, in which corporations take advantage of perturbances to consolidate their power over resources and the food supply ever more. How can we prevent this happening?
Okay, Molly, that's typical of you. If you don't know Molly, this is one of the great thinkers. Molly, I disagree with you. I think resilience we don't want it to be in that model, my model, I don't know if you're on that, like the engineering, to get to bounce back and come back to where it was. I think we want it to be something else. So you know me, I agree with you completely. The point is how to chart that. And let me be frank. One of the things not written in my report, but one of the things that's been bubbling in the back of my head is, why does it take shocks to get good things, to have room for maneuver to get to happen? This, unfortunately, is what can happen. One of the key ingredients, you don't need me to say this, Molly, but I'm saying it for everyone else, is unless you have good movements that agree on what they want from resilience and agree what they want, back to Linda's point about legislation, you're not going to get in a crisis and from a crisis what you want. And I'm saying something more as a public health person. We want to prevent having a crisis. In other words, to do the prevent work now. So I totally agree with you. We don't want to return to normality, that version of resilience. But we do want civil resilience in terms of the other question, who was it? Yanni Armstrong, about capabilities and capacities. That thinking, Molly, is where I'm drawn to. We've got to build capacities. The community cafe, I've spent most of the last 2 days dealing with and engaging with and finding out what they do and how they work. They see capacity building and food skills giving as one of the key things for helping people come off difficult circumstances in their lives to dealing with all sorts of things through food. So I agree with you, not a return to normality, but to something better. And I repeat, part of my optimism, and part of the reason I wanted to do this talk in my home territory, the Centre for Food Policy's Food Thinkers, is to say, look, this is really important stuff, I think. And there's fabulous work that we've all been looking at and encouraging, but it can become something else if we get it bigger. And I think we're seeing that. I'm hugely impressed by the Fix Our Food movement, spreading, uniting cities that historically have been pretty, I was educated, lived in Leeds, Bradford, York, Sheffield, coming together and saying, we can do a Yorkshire thing here. That's not returning to normality.
Thanks, Tim. We've got one final question from Carol Lever. Do you think we will ever have a national food strategy that includes the sea and land together? It feels like when we speak about food resilience, it's always land.
Carol, I am really pleased you did that. Yes, see features in my report. Let me tell you, I'm partly Welsh and I've got family in the very northwest of Wales. We're surrounded by sea. It's got the most enormous tide. I gave one of my few speeches I really liked 25 years ago to the fishmongers of Britain. In one of their annual gatherings, I said, I want a day where I see mussels on the menu of school meals in Britain every week in season. In other words, when the month has got an R, as my Welsh family taught me. Absolutely right. It would be crazy not to take the sea seriously. But there's another bit in which the sea comes into my report, which is I was born actually in Lincolnshire. It's where most veg comes from, what little there is in Britain, and it's on its knees. It's not where all of it comes from. And much of the growing is beneath sea level. You now go and look at the planning, the Environment Agency's plans, anticipations of sea levels in Lincolnshire and the fens. Well, you know, the ecologists are all saying, let's have it back as marshland, as it used to be. I totally understand that. In which case, where is the horticulture going to go? We've got to move it uphill, is what my report is going to be saying. So we've got a better match of sea, marsh, and land. Spot on, Carol.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Tim. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there tonight. We've got a long list of questions, and I just wanted to relay back to you that Molly said, I'm honoured by your comment, and she also added, great response. It takes vision and planning and empowering citizens. So, Tim, thank you very, very much for a wonderful food thinkers. It's been a really engaging Q&A session, and we had a lot of attendance today, just shy of 200. So lots of people very interested in the topic and really keen to hear from you. Clearly global representation as well tonight. So thank you very much. We're going to try and scrape the questions for you so that you can answer them, potentially follow up with some attendees. But thank you very much.
Yeah. Can I just say, thanks so much, everyone, for attending, but also your interest. When I started out on this, I thought, oh God, is this going to be, you know, I'm going to be seen as a complete fruitcake going into all of this thing, and it's scaremongering. I don't think it is scaremongering, by the way. It's anti-scaremongering. This is dealing with realities, not allowing trolls and stupidities to take over. This is something anyone interested in food systems, food policy should and could think about and contribute to.
Excellent ending comment. Thank you very much, Tim. I just wanted to remind everyone that our next Food Thinkers is on March 20th with Professor Roberto Cennino. So please do tune in then as well. So thank you again very much, Tim. And thanks everyone for joining online.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks for that very much. Thanks, Christina. Enjoy the cooking.